Why do we call Good Friday good? I remember being a kid and thinking, it just feels wrong. This is the day when Jesus was executed by the state. There's torture, betrayal, abandonment, and death. Bad Friday honestly felt more honest. But of course, the adults explained it to me as, well, it's good because God used it for salvation. Which sounds comforting, until you sit with that for a minute. Let's talk about why. Hey everyone, I'm Colin, the resident nerd and Bible scholar here at the Bible Uncut and Unfiltered. Here's what that statement subtly teaches us. If something leads to a good outcome, then the harm along the way doesn't really matter that much. And that logic doesn't just stay in theology. That is the same logic that allows churches to excuse abuse. That's the same logic that shuts down accountability. That's the same logic that says, well, something good came out of it, so maybe we shouldn't criticize it. And if everything works out for good in the end, then evil never really has to be named as evil. And once you train people not to name harm, you shouldn't be surprised when harm keeps happening. What I didn't learn until much later, actually relatively recently, is that good was an older English way of saying holy, like calling the Bible the good book instead of Holy Bible. What surprised me even more is that not all Christians even call that day Good Friday. And historically, that's not even the most common name for it. In the Catholic tradition, the official designation wasn't Good Friday, even though most people ended up using it that way. It was things like Friday of the Passion of the Lord or Friday of the Preparation. And other Christian traditions and other languages use names like Holy Friday, Great Friday, Grand Friday, or one of my favorites, Long Friday. Notice what those names don't do. They don't rush past the violence. They don't sanitize the suffering. They don't slap a shiny label on something brutal and call it resolved. They let the day be what it is. Now, different churches mark this day in different ways. Some promote fasting, others silence, communion, special services, sometimes even shared meals. And there's something valuable about slowing down and being reflective for a moment. But for people like me, Good Friday was often framed in a way that was actually kind of harmful. I heard sermon after sermon about how much Jesus suffered because of me. How my sin hurt God, how I should feel worse, how I should feel smaller, how I should sit in guilt longer. And that completely misses the point of the incarnation and resurrection. For people who already grew up with shame, fear, and spiritual trauma, this kind of framing doesn't lead to repentance. It leads to despair. This day was never meant to be a divine guilt trip. That's why I've come to appreciate the name Holy Friday. Not good, as if violence is somehow okay, but holy, because God is present even as violence is enacted. Holy Friday doesn't whitewash the cross. It doesn't pretend the system worked. It doesn't say, see, the suffering was all worth it. It says God came near. God suffered. Not in a stop complaining because others have it worse kind of way, but in a you're not alone kind of way. Grief, disappointment, betrayal, and unmet expectations, Holy Friday tells us that God is not distant. God is not angry. God is not standing outside of pain and explaining why it's necessary for us. God enters it. And what happens next is painfully familiar. The religious and political systems do what systems always do. They silence the one who threatens them. Doesn't remind me of any current events at all. So maybe the point of the day isn't to call it good, and it's not to sit in shame either. Maybe the point is to sit with the truth that God is found with us. Immanuel, God with us, not above us, not against us, not demanding suffering as payment. Holy Friday doesn't justify evil, it exposes it. And it whispers something radical into the darkest moments of our lives. You are not abandoned. You are not forgotten. And God is closer than you think.